Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're looking at something that I think is going to be super interesting, especially if you've ever had to go through trying to figure out what's making you feel sick.
It can be a real pain, can it?
Yeah, it can.
Mm.
All those tests and waiting for results, and sometimes it feels like it takes forever.
It really does. And it's not just the inconvenience either. I mean, think about something serious like meningitis.
Right.
Every hour matters with those kinds of infections.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to be diving into today. We're going to be talking about some research from UCSF that's looking at a new way to diagnose infections, and it's a single test
Imagine being able to pinpoint what's making you sick in just one day.
from just one test.
That's the promise of this research.
So right now, getting a diagnosis, it can feel like a guessing game sometimes, right?
Mm,
You go to the doctor and you describe your symptoms.
right.
And then you kind of get stuck in this cycle of tests and waiting for results.
And more tests. Yeah, it's a really frustrating process.
It really is.
And like we were saying, sometimes that waiting can actually be really dangerous.
So tell me more about this new test. I know that it's called MNGS.
Yeah, it stands for metagenomic next-generation sequencing.
Okay, break that down for me. What makes it so different from how we usually test for infections?
So normally doctors have to kind of have an idea of what they think might be causing the infection,
Oh, okay.
and then they order a test that's made to find that specific thing.
Right.
But with MNGS, it analyzes all the DNA and all the RNA in the sample. So that could be blood, it could be that fluid that's around your brain and your spinal cord.
Cerebrospinal fluid.
Yeah, exactly. Or any other fluid from your body, really.
So instead of like looking for a needle in a haystack, it's examining all the hay.
That's a great way to put it. So even if it's something rare, something unusual, MNGS can find it.
So the UCSF study, they really put this MNGS to the test.
They did. They looked at nearly 5,000 samples of cerebrospinal fluid,
Mm.
all from patients that they thought might have neurological infections.
Yeah.
And get this, MNGS correctly identified 86% of those infections.
That's amazing. How does that compare to the traditional testing methods?
It's significantly better. It's a whole different level. And, it's not just about the numbers, it's about real people. There was this young boy in Wisconsin, and he was really sick. Doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with him.
Oh, wow.
They ran all sorts of tests. Nothing came back. Finally, they tried MNGS, and within just 48 hours, they had a diagnosis.
And what was it?
It was leptospirosis. It's a bacterial infection.
Is that treatable?
It is, luckily, and in this case, they were able to treat him with penicillin.
Oh, wow.
And he made a full recovery. It really shows how powerful this technology can be. It's not just about, numbers on a page.
It's life-saving.
Yeah.
So that was a neurological infection. But I read that MNGS is being used for other types of infections, too.
Yeah, that's right. They're working on adapting it for respiratory infections, which could be a total game changer, especially if we're talking about, a pandemic situation.
Like, imagine if we'd had this during the early days of COVID-19
Yeah, it could have made a huge difference. We could have identified the virus so much faster.
and maybe even slowed the spread.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not just about treating individual patients, it's about protecting public health on a larger scale.
So where does this stand right now? I mean, is this something that we're going to start seeing in our doctor's offices anytime soon?
Well, both the CSF and the respiratory MNGS tests, they've gotten this breakthrough device designation from the FDA.
Okay, so what does that mean?
It means that they can get approved faster and be available more widely. So yeah, I think it's definitely something that we could be seeing more of in the near future.
So faster diagnoses, more targeted treatments, potentially saving money by avoiding unnecessary treatments and hospital stays. And of course, we can't forget that powerful tool in fighting pandemics. It sounds like MNGS really could change healthcare as we know it.
It really could, but there's always a but,
But
right?
there's always a but.
Every new technology comes with new questions, new challenges. We have to think about the ethics of it all.
That's a great point. And that's exactly what we're going to do next time. We're going to delve a little deeper into the science behind MNGS.
Yeah.
We'll talk about how it actually works, what makes it so groundbreaking, and we'll explore some of those ethical considerations in more detail.
Absolutely.
So join us next time for part 2 of our deep dive into MNGS. It's going to be fascinating.
We'll see you then. Welcome back. We're going to get into some of the more nitty-gritty stuff about MNGS today.
The science behind it.
Exactly.
So last time we were talking about the incredible things it can do.
Mm-hmm.
Now I kind of want to understand, how does it actually work?
Well, every living thing, every organism has a unique genetic code.
Right. Their DNA?
Their DNA or RNA, yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's a virus, a bacteria, a parasite, whatever.
They've all got their own?
They all have this distinct blueprint, and that's what MNGS is looking at. It's analyzing that genetic material.
Okay, so it's analyzing all the genetic material, but it doesn't have to have any idea of what it's looking for ahead of time.
Exactly. It's kind of like, if you think about a detective at a crime scene, they're going to dust for every fingerprint.
Right. Even if they don't have a suspect in mind.
Exactly. So first, scientists take the sample. Could be blood, could be cerebrospinal fluid, could be a swab, whatever it is.
Okay.
They extract all the DNA and RNA. And then comes the really cool part. They use something called next-generation sequencing. And basically, this technology can read millions, even billions, of DNA and RNA fragments all at the same time.
Whoa. So it's kind of like a superpowered microscope that can see all those tiny genetic clues?
Exactly, it really is. So once you have all this data, you need some pretty heavy-duty computing power to make sense of it.
Right, because it's just like mountains of data.
Mountains of data. They use these sophisticated algorithms to compare the sequences that they find in the sample with huge databases of known pathogens.
Okay, so it's like a massive matching game, trying to see, okay, does this DNA match anything that we already know about?
You got it. And if it finds a match, boom,
I
you've
see.
got our diagnosis. But here's where it gets even more interesting. What if it's something brand new?
A new virus.
A new virus, a new bacteria, something we've never seen before.
Well, that must happen pretty often.
It does, especially with all the emerging infectious diseases out there. But even if there's no exact match, MNGS can still provide valuable information. It can point to genetic sequences that are unusual, that could be signs of something new.
So it's like an early warning system.
Exactly. Like for new pandemics, for example. Imagine if we'd had this technology during, the early days of COVID.
Yeah, it could have been a game changer.
We could have identified the virus much sooner, understood it better, maybe even contained it more effectively.
So it's not just about treating individuals, it's about public health.
It really is. Now, the UCSF research, they looked into how MNGS performed compared to the traditional testing methods.
Yeah, what did they find out?
Well, it wasn't just that it was more accurate overall, it was especially good at finding certain types of infections that are usually really tricky to diagnose.
Okay, like what kind?
Like viral encephalitis, a lot of the fungal infections, or those really rare infections.
Where doctors don't even know what to test for sometimes.
Exactly. MNGS is kind of like a safety net.
I can see how this would be huge for doctors,
Mm.
especially when they're dealing with these really complicated cases. It gives them a clear picture so they can make better decisions about treatment.
Faster answers, better treatments, hopefully better outcomes.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just treating individuals. Think about public health surveillance.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Being able to spot a new or unusual pathogen early on.
Exactly. You can stop it from spreading, maybe even prevent an outbreak. It's all about being proactive, having the tools to quickly assess potential threats. It's a powerful tool.
So we've talked about how MNGS works, the science behind it, all the potential benefits. We've even touched a little bit on the ethical side of things.
Yep.
But let's be practical. What's the future of MNGS? Is this something I'm going to be seeing at my doctor's office in the near future?
Well, we did mention that the CSF and the respiratory tests, they've both gotten that breakthrough device designation from the FDA.
Yeah.
That's a big step towards making it more widely available. But there are still some hurdles to overcome.
Okay, like what? What are the biggest challenges right now?
Cost, definitely. Right now, it's still relatively expensive compared to the traditional tests. Makes sense, it's new technology, but it's a barrier.
Right, so it needs to be more affordable.
Yeah, it needs to be more accessible. Also, not every lab can do this kind of testing. It requires specialized equipment, specialized expertise in genomics and bioinformatics.
It's not just about the sequencing. It's about being able to analyze all that data that comes out.
Exactly. You need those sophisticated algorithms, powerful computers, and people who understand it all. It's a whole ecosystem of technology and expertise.
So what's being done to make this process more efficient?
Well, machine learning and artificial intelligence are playing a bigger and bigger role.
Oh, interesting.
They're becoming much more sophisticated and can help automate a lot of the analysis, which makes things faster and more accurate.
Wow, that's incredible.
So even though there are challenges, there's a lot of momentum, and I think we're going to see some major progress in the coming years.
I hope so. This technology really has the potential to revolutionize how we deal with infectious diseases.
From treating individual patients to monitoring global health threats, it's an exciting time to be following all this.
It really is. Before we wrap things up, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, the ethical considerations. I think it's really important to have those discussions, especially as this technology becomes more widespread.
I totally agree. It's not just about the science, it's about how we use it.
We've really dived deep into the science and potential of MNGS, but like we've been talking about, there are some really important ethical questions that need to be addressed.
In our last segment, we're going to focus on those questions, those challenges that come up as MNGS moves from the lab into the real world. Things like data privacy, access to testing, the potential for overdiagnosis.
I can't wait to unpack all of that. It's going to be a fascinating discussion. Join us next time for the final part of our MNGS deep dive. And we are back for the final part of our deep dive into the world of MNGS. We've talked about the science behind it, the potential benefits, and some of the challenges.
Now it's time to talk about the ethics.
Right. Because, like with any new powerful technology, we have to think about the implications.
Exactly. How do we make sure this technology is used responsibly? How do we make sure it's accessible to everyone?
And you mentioned earlier, one of the ethical challenges is this potential for overdiagnosis. What did you mean by that?
Well, MNGS can detect a whole bunch of different microorganisms. Some of them might not even be causing any harm.
Oh, so just because something shows up on the test doesn't necessarily mean it's making you sick.
Right, and that could lead to unnecessary treatment, anxiety for the patient.
That makes sense.
So we need clear guidelines, protocols for how to interpret these MNGS results. We don't want to overtreat, right?
Right. We want to make sure that any treatment is actually necessary and based on evidence.
Exactly.
We also talked about data privacy.
Oh, that's a big one.
MNGS generates a ton of genetic data. So how do we protect that information?
That's right. This is really sensitive information. We have to make sure it's stored securely, not misused, not accessed by people who shouldn't have access.
So really strong safeguards are needed.
Absolutely. Clear guidelines, regulations, all of that. And then there's the issue of access and equity.
Right, because we talked about the cost of MNGS being a barrier.
If this is going to truly revolutionize healthcare, everyone needs to be able to benefit.
Not just the people who can afford it.
Exactly. We need to find ways to make this technology more affordable and available to everyone.
So it seems like a lot of work needs to be done to address these ethical concerns.
It is, but the good news is that these conversations are happening. People are thinking about these things.
That's good to hear.
We need to be having these discussions now as this technology is being developed.
Right, it's all about finding the right balance.
Embracing innovation, but making sure we're using it responsibly.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
What are your final thoughts on the future of MNGS?
You know, I'm very optimistic. I think we are on the verge of a whole new era in diagnostics. We can identify infections quickly, accurately, even if it's a pathogen we've never seen before.
And that has implications not just for treating individual patients.
But for global health security.
It's been incredible learning about all this with you. And I think one of the big takeaways is that scientific advancements often come with some really complex ethical questions.
Absolutely. We have to be thoughtful, make informed decisions, and make sure we're using these tools for the benefit of everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into MNGS. We hope you found it insightful.
It's been a pleasure. Until next time, stay curious.